After we invested $150,000 in our son's auto shop, my daughter-in-law sneered, "Only close family," at the grand opening and demanded we keep paying the bills. We smiled politely, then stopped every single payment cold. Their faces turned white as sheets. But this 64-year-old retired claims expert had spent 31 years reading the fine print, and their betrayal was about to cost them everything they thought they owned. Before continuing, subscribe to the channel and write in the comments what time it is in your region right now. My name is Ralph Bishop. I'm 64 years old, and I've spent the last 31 years doing something most people can't stomach, reading the fine print. As a senior insurance adjuster for a commercial claims firm out of Fort Worth, Texas, my entire career was built on one simple truth. Documents don't lie. People do. Numbers don't cheat. People do. The moment you understand that, everything else becomes manageable. I retired 2 years ago. Now I spend my mornings on the porch of our house at 4114 Magnolia Drive with a cup of black coffee and my afternoons in the garage with a piece of sandpaper and whatever broken Victorian armchair I picked up at the flea market on Saturday. There's always something: a cracked leg, a collapsed seat frame, veneer peeling off like sunburned skin. People throw away things they don't understand how to fix. I bring them home and start over. Norma says the garage smells like linseed oil and stubbornness. She's not wrong on either count. Norma Bishop, my wife. 61 years old and still the most dangerous person in any room she walks into. Not because she raises her voice, but because she never does. We met 39 years ago at the Brass Rail, a swing dance club on the west side of Fort Worth. I was 25 and had 2 left feet and the confidence of a man who had no business being on a dance floor. She was teaching a beginner's class near the far wall, patient and precise, her hand correcting my elbow without a word. I asked her name. She said, "Norma, and you're stepping wrong." I married her 3 years later. She spent 22 years as a paralegal at a small civil litigation firm. She didn't argue cases. She built them. While attorneys talked, Norma organized. She remembered every deposition date, every exhibit number, every clause in every contract she'd ever touched. When she left the firm, her supervising attorney told her she'd forgotten more law than most lawyers ever learned. She still keeps in touch with half of them, including David Wallace, who now runs his own practice out of the Tower Building downtown. Our house on Magnolia Drive has tall oak trees that block the afternoon sun. The kitchen table seats 6. For most of our marriage, that table saw birthday dinners and homework and the occasional argument that ended in laughter before dessert. Curtis used to sit at the far corner, always the far corner, with a disassembled toy car spread across the placemat, explaining to us in exhaustive detail how the axle worked. Curtis, our son, 36 years old, broad shoulders, easy smile, the kind of face that makes people trust him before he opens his mouth. He was a good kid. I mean that, honestly. Not the way parents say it to avoid the truth, but genuinely. He was curious and hardworking, and he loved engines the way I love furniture, not as a job, but as a language. He started talking about opening his own shop in his early 30s, a full-service auto and tire center, his own name on the sign. I understood that ambition completely. What I didn't fully account for was Stephanie. Stephanie Torres became Stephanie Bishop 3 years ago. She's 33, sharp-featured, well-dressed, and almost unnervingly composed. She greets Norma with a warm smile at every family dinner and calls her Norma in a tone that is technically affectionate and somehow entirely cold. Norma noticed it first. She told me 6 months into the marriage, quietly over the dishes, "She's performing." I asked what she meant. Norma handed me a plate to dry and said, "Watch her eyes when the check comes." I watched. Norma was right. She always is. It wasn't that Stephanie was unkind. She was never unkind. It was subtler than that. She managed Curtis. Not in a controlling way you could point to, but in the way water shapes stone. Slowly, consistently, invisibly. Over 2 years, I watched my son start to describe his parents through her vocabulary. We became supportive, which is a word people use when they want resources without responsibility. We became involved, which apparently meant we had opinions we hadn't been asked for. And somewhere in that gradual translation, we stopped being family and became something closer to investors waiting in the lobby. The afternoon Curtis came to us with the business plan, it was a Tuesday. He spread the papers across our kitchen table with the enthusiasm of a man who had rehearsed this moment. Projections, lease terms, equipment lists, color printouts of the Keller Avenue location. I let him talk. He was good at the presentation. He'd always been good at that. When he finished, I picked up the first page. I read the way I was trained to read, looking for what isn't there. And what wasn't there was simple. No repayment schedule, no loan structure, no percentage of ownership in exchange for capital. $150,000 framed as a contribution, not a transaction. Under the table, Norma's hand found mine. One squeeze. She'd seen it too. Curtis was still talking about the paint colors for the waiting room. I set the page down. "Curtis," I said. He stopped. "I'm glad you're doing this. I mean it." He smiled. "But before anything moves forward," I kept my voice even, "we need to do this with paperwork." His smile didn't fall exactly. It shifted. "Dad, it's family." "I know," I said. "That's why I want it in writing." That night, after Curtis left, Norma and I sat at the kitchen table with 2 cups of tea and the business plan spread between us. She had a yellow legal pad. Old habit. She never trusts her memory enough not to write things down, which is ironic because her memory is essentially perfect. "Walk me through what you want to include," she said, uncapping her pen. "Promissory note," I said. "Standard structure. Principal of $150,000, 4% annual interest. Repayment schedule starting 6 months after the business opens. Collateral tied to a percentage of the business equity. I'm thinking 20% ownership stake as security." She was already writing. "Notarized?" "Absolutely." "I'll draft the equity clause language tonight," she said. "I still have the templates from Hargrove and Lind. I want the repayment terms broken into quarterly installments. Easier to enforce if something slips." I looked at her across the table. "You already knew this was coming." She didn't look up from the legal pad. I knew it the moment Stephanie handed him the folder at Christmas. She'd already designed the logo. A pause. Curtis doesn't know how to use design software. We worked until past midnight. By the time we finished, the document was 4 pages long, clearly written, legally sound, signed the next morning by a notary at the UPS store on Camp Bowie Boulevard. Curtis arrived looking slightly deflated. Stephanie arrived looking like she'd spent the drive over coaching him through it. "You really need all this?" Curtis asked, looking at the pages. "You're borrowing $150,000, I said. "I'd need all this if you were a stranger. You're my son. So, yes." Stephanie read every line, slowly. I watched her face while she read. Neutral, professional, giving nothing away. When she finished, she signed without a word. Curtis signed after her, still wearing that slightly wounded expression of a man who has been asked to treat a conversation like a contract. That afternoon, I transferred the first installment, $40,000, to the business account Curtis had opened under Bishop's Auto and Tire, LLC. What followed was 4 months of construction. I won't pretend it wasn't exciting at first. We drove past the Keller Avenue location twice during the renovation and watched the building change. Fresh exterior paint, new signage going up, the parking lot resurfaced. Curtis texted photos regularly, the lift equipment arriving, the alignment machine being installed. Progress. But Norma noticed something early, and once she pointed it out, I couldn't unsee it. Stephanie only appeared when money was needed. When Curtis called to discuss progress, just to talk, just to share, it was Curtis on the phone. When there was a new invoice, a new expense, a request for the next installment, Stephanie called. Always Stephanie. She'd deliver the number cleanly. An additional $11,000 for HVAC upgrades, $9,000 for the customer waiting area, renovation, $7,000 for the point-of-sale system. Specific, justified, documented enough to satisfy a quick look. I started keeping a spreadsheet. Column A, date. Column B, who called. Column C, amount requested. Column D, stated purpose. It was a reflex. Same thing I used to do with large commercial claims. You track patterns. Patterns tell you things people don't say out loud. By the end of the fourth month, we had put in $150,000 exactly. The shop was nearly ready, and the pattern in my spreadsheet was clean as a diagram. Curtis called to celebrate milestones. Stephanie called when the account needed funding. One evening, I slid the laptop across the table to Norma. She studied it for a moment without expression. Her finger traced the column headers, not reading, just thinking. She does that when she's assembling something in her head. She's the one managing the money, Norma said. She's the one requesting it, I said. That's the same thing. She pushed the laptop back. Curtis doesn't know the numbers, Ralph. He knows the tools. She knows the accounts. I stared at the spreadsheet. 31 years of reading claims taught me that the most expensive losses aren't the ones that happen all at once. They're the ones that accumulate, small, documented, reasonable on their own, catastrophic in sequence. You think he knows? I asked. Norma picked up her tea, found it cold, set it back down. I think Curtis knows what she tells him, and I think she's careful about what she tells him. There was a weight to that sentence I didn't want to sit with, so I closed the laptop and told myself we were almost done. The money was out, the shop was nearly ready, and once it opened, the repayment schedule would kick in and everything would find its natural order. I'd seen enough claims to know that the paperwork either protects you or it doesn't. Ours would protect us. I found that out 3 weeks later when Norma came in from the garden. She'd run into a neighbor who'd been at a dinner party with one of Curtis's suppliers. Apparently, the shop opening was the talk of the evening, the guest list, the catering. Norma peeled off her gloves. Were we invited to any of that? She asked. Not to my knowledge, I said. She set her gloves on the porch railing and looked out at the yard. Interesting. One word. But I've been married to Norma Bishop for 39 years, and I know exactly what interesting means in that tone. It means she's already 3 steps ahead, and she's waiting for me to catch up. Then the invitation came. A text from Curtis. Grand opening next Saturday. Come celebrate with us. Short. Friendly. The kind of text you send to people you remember at the last minute. I called the next morning to confirm the time. A small gesture, the kind parents make because it's what parents do. I expected Curtis to answer. He didn't. Stephanie did. And what she said next changed everything. Her voice was flat. Not cold the way cold gets when someone is upset. Cold the way marble is cold. Structural. Intentional. The opening is for close family and business partners, Stephanie said. You're investors. It's not really your event. I stood in the kitchen, phone pressed to my ear, and said nothing for a moment. Not because I didn't have words. I had plenty. I said nothing because I'd spent 31 years learning that the first thing you say after a shock is usually the wrong thing, and the second thing is usually better. I see, I said. Thank you for clarifying. I hung up. Norma was standing in the doorway. She'd heard every word. The kitchen isn't large, and she hadn't been pretending to be busy. She was watching me. Her expression was still. Not hurt, not angry. Still. The way a person gets still when something confirms what they already knew, but had been hoping, was wrong. Close family, I said. I heard. I put the phone on the counter. My jaw was tight. I noticed that, the tightness, and I made myself breathe through it. Norma crossed the kitchen and sat at the table. Not beside me. Across from me. She wanted to see my face. Say it, she said. I'm thinking. I know. Say it anyway. I pulled out the chair and sat down. We put $150,000 into that building. We signed a notarized promissory note. We transferred funds in documented installments. And according to Stephanie, we are investors, not family. She's right about one thing, Norma said. I looked at her. We are investors. That's exactly what the promissory note says. We're the creditors. She folded her hands on the table. She just handed us our standing. I stared at her for a second, then something in my chest unwound. Just slightly. You've been waiting for this. I've been paying attention, she said. There's a difference. We sat there for a few minutes without speaking. Outside, a car moved slowly down Magnolia Drive. The refrigerator hummed. Norma refilled her coffee, and when she sat back down, she pulled her legal pad toward her. Walk me through the document, she said. Section by section. Pretend I've never read it. You drafted half of it. I know. I want to hear it from your side. You read contracts differently than I do. She uncapped her pen. You look for what's missing. I look for what's there. Between the two of us, we have the whole picture. So we went through it. The principal amount, the interest schedule, the collateral clause, the 20% equity stake in Bishop's Auto and Tire LLC that served as security against the loan, the repayment timeline beginning 6 months after the business opened. Every clause we had written at this same table, at this same hour, months earlier. By the time we finished, it was past 11. Norma had 2 pages of notes. I had the document memorized in a way I hadn't quite appreciated until I heard myself reciting it aloud. She thinks this is paper, I said. She thinks everything is negotiable until it isn't, Norma said. She's never dealt with a promissory note that was actually executed correctly. How do you know? Norma set down her pen. Because she signed it like it was a formality. Did you see her face? She wasn't reading it. She was performing reading it. She was waiting for it to be over. She paused. Someone who understood what she was signing would have pushed back on the equity clause. She was right. I hadn't thought about it that way, but she was right. A savvy borrower would have negotiated. Stephanie had signed and smiled, which meant she thought the document was theater. That night, I couldn't sleep. I went to the garage at midnight and turned on the work light over the Victorian chair I'd been restoring. A wingback with a cracked front leg and veneer coming loose at the seat corners. I sat in the other chair, the solid one, and I thought. I thought about the pattern I'd tracked in my spreadsheet. Stephanie calling only when money moved, Curtis presenting the plan, Curtis selling the dream, but Stephanie handling all the accounts. I thought about the promissory note. Every clause, every schedule, every line Norma and I had drafted at this same kitchen table at midnight. And I thought about how someone who truly believed that note was just a formality might talk about it. Investors, she'd said, clean, dismissive, final. She believed the note was paper. She believed it had no teeth. That was her first mistake. I went back inside. Norma was awake, sitting up in bed with a notepad on her knee. She does that. Keeps a notepad on the nightstand. Habit from her paralegal years. I'm going to call David Wallace in the morning, I said. She looked up. David Wallace, her former colleague, now running his own practice downtown, 28 floors above the rest of Fort Worth in the Tower Building. She'd known him for 15 years. He specialized in commercial claims and debt enforcement. He was thorough, quiet, and absolutely relentless once you handed him a clean document. We had a very clean document. I already left him a message, Norma said. I looked at her. She capped her pen. While you were in the garage, she said. He'll call back by 9. I sat on the edge of the bed. Outside, the oak trees on Magnolia Drive were moving in the summer wind, shifting shadows across the ceiling. I thought about Curtis at 6 years old, spread across that kitchen table with his disassembled toy car. I thought about how he'd looked at me then, like I could answer any question he had. The tightness came back. I let it sit there. I didn't try to breathe through it this time. Some things deserve to hurt for a minute before you put them away. David called at 8:47. I was already on my second cup of coffee, and Norma was at the table with her legal pad and a highlighted copy of the promissory note. She'd been up before me. She usually is on days when something matters. We met David Wallace 2 days later on the 5th floor of the Tower Building. His office faced west. He was 58, silver-haired, the kind of lawyer who never raises his voice because he never needs to. He shook my hand, and then Norma's, and I noticed the way his face shifted when he saw her, the recognition of a peer. Norma put this together? He asked, turning the promissory note over in his hands. We drafted it together, I said. I handled the financial structure. She handled the legal language. He read it, the whole thing, silently, methodically, pausing twice to reread specific clauses. When he finished, he set it on the desk and looked at us. This is a properly executed promissory note, he said. Notarized, signed by both borrowers. Collateral clause attached to 20% equity in the LLC. Under Texas law, this is fully enforceable. He paused. You said she called them investors? Her exact word, I said. He nodded slowly. Under this document, you have the right to demand a full accounting of how the loan proceeds were used. All 150,000, itemized. We'd like to exercise that right, Norma said. I'll draft the formal request today. He looked at me. Ralph, I want you to start building a parallel file. Bank transfer records, any communications about fund requests, timestamps, everything you have. Already started, I said. I have a spreadsheet going back 4 months. He almost smiled. Of course you do. That afternoon, back at the house, we divided the work based on what each of us is actually good at. Norma sat at the kitchen table with her laptop and began pulling together the legal documentation trail, the promissory note, the notary certificate, all of our wire transfer confirmations. She printed and organized everything into a single binder with tabbed sections. I went to work on the evidence file. I screenshotted every social media post from the grand opening, the ones Curtis had tagged under Bishop's Auto and Tire, the ones Stephanie had shared about our big day. The guest list was practically visible in the photo tags. Suppliers, neighbors, friends, Stephanie's family. 43 people, by my count. Not one of them was us. I printed our final wire transfer confirmation and compared it to the opening date. The money had cleared 11 days before that event. We had funded the party we hadn't been invited to. I wrote that number down and underlined it. How's your file? Norma asked from across the table. Getting interesting, I said. I slid her the printout with the timeline. She studied it, then made a note on her legal pad. David's formal request went out an hour ago, she said. 14 days to respond. And if they don't? She capped her pen. Then we have grounds to move immediately. 3 days after David sent the request, Curtis called. Not Stephanie, Curtis himself, which told me the formal letter had landed like a stone through a window. Dad. His voice had that particular strain of someone who's been coached on what to say and is already forgetting the script. Why are you involving a lawyer? We're family. I let a moment pass. Curtis, I said, you signed a promissory note. That makes this a financial agreement. Financial agreements have procedures. It feels like you don't trust us. It feels like your wife told me I'm not close family, I said. So let's work within the framework we actually have. Silence. Just send the accounting, I said. It's straightforward. David's letter explains exactly what's needed. He hung up without saying goodbye. Norma had been listening from the other side of the kitchen. When I put the phone down, she handed me a cup of coffee without a word. I took it. We stood at the counter for a moment, not talking. Then my phone buzzed. A text from Stephanie. You'll regret making this complicated. I showed it to Norma. She read it, set the phone back on the counter, and picked up her own coffee. Save it, she said. I already had. Screenshot, timestamp, saved to the file. That evening I went back to the garage. The wingback chair was coming along. The crack leg splinted and clamped, the veneer re-glued and pressed flat under weights. I ran my hand along the repaired joint. Solid. You'd never know it had been broken. Behind me I heard the garage door open. Norma leaned in, coffee in hand. Louise Gomez called, she said. She's available. I gave her David's contact. Louise Gomez, a forensic accountant Norma had found through her network, recommended by 2 former colleagues as someone who didn't miss things. Independent, precise, with a waiting list that Norma had managed to skip by knowing the right name to drop. When does she start? I asked. She already has the financial request documents. She'll begin as soon as Curtis sends the accounting. I turned back to the chair. And if what she finds is what I think she'll find? Norma was quiet for a moment. Then Stephanie's going to learn something important, she said. Paper has teeth. She went back inside. I sat with that for a while, the smell of linseed oil in the air, the repaired chair solid under my hands. 2 days later, Stephanie texted again. Not a threat this time. A list. Equipment upgrade, $8,400. Revised exterior signage, $2,100. Marketing launch campaign, $3,700. Total, $14,200. Obviously, you'll cover this as usual. Let us know when it's sent. I read it twice. Then I walked into the living room and showed Norma. She read it. Looked up, and for the first time since this whole thing started, she smiled. The real one, the one that means she's already 5 steps past the moment you're standing in. I smiled back. I typed 4 words. Received. Thank you for the information. And we didn't send a cent. Stephanie's text sat in my phone for 2 days before I deleted it. Not because it bothered me, because I'd already saved the screenshot, time-stamped, and filed. After that, it was just clutter. You'll regret making this complicated. I thought about that line while I sanded the chair leg in the garage the following morning. In 31 years of commercial claims work, I'd seen a lot of people try to intimidate their way out of a documented obligation. It never worked. The document doesn't care about your tone. The document just sits there, notarized and patient, waiting for someone to test it. We were ready to let them test it. The meeting with David Wallace that week was different from the first one, more specific. He'd had time to review the full promissory note, the transfer records I'd forwarded, and the social media screenshots Norma had printed and organized in the binder. He set it all out on his desk and walked us through what we had. Under the terms of this note, he said, you have the right to demand a full accounting of how the loan proceeds were applied. Every dollar. Itemized, documented, submitted in writing. How enforceable is that? I asked. Completely. It's written directly into the collateral clause. He tapped the page. If they fail to provide a satisfactory accounting, or if the accounting shows material misuse of funds, you have grounds to accelerate the debt, meaning the entire balance becomes due immediately, and to pursue the equity stake as collateral. Norma had been listening with her hands folded. We'd like to add an independent accountant to the process, she said, someone who reviews whatever they submit. David nodded. Smart. Do you have someone in mind? Louise Gomez, Norma said. She was recommended by 2 people I trust. Forensic accounting background, commercial focus. He wrote the name down. I'll coordinate with her directly. She'll need whatever they produce. He looked at us across the desk. I'll send the formal accounting request today. They have 14 days to respond. We drove home in a comfortable quiet. Norma had her notepad open on her knee, reviewing her list. I kept both hands on the wheel and let myself feel the particular satisfaction of a process properly set in motion. Not excitement, something calmer than that. The feeling of watching a structure you built do exactly what it was designed to do. Louise starts as soon as they submit, Norma said, not looking up. And if they don't submit? Then David files. Either way, we move forward. Back at the house, I went to work on the parallel evidence file. Norma had built the legal folder, documents, certifications, correspondence. My job was the financial and behavioral record. Every transfer, every request, every social media post that contradicted what I expected their accounting would claim. I found the photos of their apartment renovation, new sectional sofa, tagged in a post 3 weeks after our 3rd installment, a dining table that hadn't existed in any of the earlier photos. I cross-referenced the dates. The furniture appeared between our 2nd and 3rd transfers. Nothing in Curtis's business plan had included a furniture line item. I printed it, added it to the file. I also printed the seating chart from the grand opening, reconstructed from photo tags and comments. 43 people, suppliers, neighbors, friends, Stephanie's side of the family. A full celebration by any measure. I added that page to the binder too. Right behind the wire transfer confirmation showing our final payment had cleared 11 days before the event. We had funded the party. We just hadn't been invited to it. I thought that detail would look interesting in a court filing, if it came to that. 2 days after David's letter was sent, Curtis called. His voice had that strained quality of someone trying to sound casual while standing in a room that's on fire. Dad, why is there a lawyer involved? We're family. I let a moment pass. Curtis, I said, you borrowed $150,000. You signed a promissory note. That's not a family matter. That's a financial agreement. Financial agreements have procedures. It feels like you don't trust us. The 14-day window is in the document, I said. Just send the accounting. It's a straightforward request. Silence. Curtis? My voice was even. You signed it. You know what you signed. He hung up without goodbye. I set the phone down and noted the time in my log. Norma came in from the other room. How did he sound? She asked. Rattled, I said. not guilty, rattled. There's a difference. Guilt sounds like someone who knows what they did. Rattled sounds like someone who's just realizing they might not know everything that was done in their name. She considered that for a moment, turning her pen over in her fingers. That's going to matter later. She was right. It would. 3 days before the deadline, Louise Gomez called. She had a question about one of the transfer memo lines. Professional, precise, zero small talk. I liked her immediately. She said she'd be ready to begin the moment the accounting arrived. On day 13, it arrived. Curtis sent it, not Stephanie, Curtis, through David's office. A PDF, 12 pages, organized by expense category. David forwarded it to Louise that evening. Norma and I sat in the kitchen and waited. The next morning, Louise called back. I have preliminary findings, she said. You'll want to see them in person. Louise Gomez's office was on the second floor of a building on 8th Avenue. Compact, organized, every surface clear except for what she was currently working on. She was in her mid-40s, dark hair pulled back, reading glasses pushed up on her head. She shook our hands and got directly to the point. I appreciated that. She had printed the accounting Curtis submitted and placed it side by side with her own reconstruction from the bank records we'd provided. The comparison was laid out across 2 pages like a before and after. The submitted accounting covers $119,000 of the total, she said. That leaves $31,000 unaccounted for with no corresponding business expense documentation. Walk us through it, Norma said. Louise turned to the second sheet. 3 categories. First, home furnishings. $11,400 in purchases from 2 retailers, charged to the business debit card, delivered to a residential address. The delivery address matches the LLC registration, which is the Keller Avenue shop, but the items are sofas, a dining table, and bedroom furniture. None of those are shop equipment. I kept my face neutral. Norma's pen was moving. Second, Louise continued, a travel expense, $8,200. Flights, hotel, and resort charges in Cancun. The business account records show it coded as vendor relations. There is no corresponding vendor contract, no invoice from a supplier, and no follow-up purchase order that would indicate a business negotiation occurred. Norma stopped writing. Third, Louise said, 2 direct transfers from the business account to a personal Visa card, $6,500 total, across 2 transactions, both in the same month. The Visa is registered to Stephanie Bishop personally, not to the LLC. The room was quiet for a moment. Norma set down her pen. She looked at the printout for a long time. Then she said quietly, I knew. I just didn't want to know. I put my hand over hers. Her fingers were cold. Louise gave us the moment, then continued. The submitted accounting does not address any of these 3 categories. The furniture is listed under equipment. The travel is listed under vendor relations with no supporting documentation. The Visa transfers are not listed at all. So the accounting is incomplete, I said. Materially incomplete, she said. In my professional opinion, it does not satisfy the terms of the accounting request as written. I looked at Norma. She looked at me. The same thought. No words needed. Can you put that in writing? Norma asked. I already have, Louise said. She slid a folder across the desk. David Wallace has a copy. We drove home without talking much. Norma held the folder on her lap the whole way. When we pulled into the driveway on Magnolia Drive and I turned off the engine, she sat for a moment before getting out. We're not going to rush this, she said. No, I agreed. We give them the opportunity to respond to Louise's findings. If they correct the accounting, legitimately with documentation, David reviews it and we proceed from there. She paused. But if they submit something incomplete again, or try to fabricate documentation, then David files, I said. She nodded, opened the car door. I want Curtis to understand what's in that folder before any of this goes further, not to protect him, because he deserves to know what she did with his business's money. I didn't say anything to that. I just thought about it, and I thought she was probably right, and I thought that was one of the things I loved about her, the way she could hold 2 things at once, the principle and the person, the case and the son. David submitted Louise's findings to Curtis and Stephanie with a formal response deadline of 7 days. Stephanie didn't call, not that day, not the next. Curtis called on day 3. His voice was different from before. The strain was still there, but the fire in the room quality was gone. What replaced it was something flatter, something that sounded like a man who had just read a document he hadn't expected to exist. "Dad," he said, "the Cancun trip?" I waited. "I thought that was a business trip. She told me it was a supplier meeting." "The accounting submitted doesn't support that," I said. Another silence, longer this time. "She handled the accounts," he said. Not as an excuse, as a statement of fact that had just become something else entirely. "I know," I said. "That's in the record." He said he needed a day to think. I said that was fine. David's deadline still stood. On day 6, Curtis submitted a revised accounting through David's office. We gave it to Louise the same afternoon. She called back the next morning. Her tone was the same, professional, precise, but there was a note in it I recognized. "The revision addresses the furniture," she said. "The items have been reclassified to personal expenses and removed from the business ledger. There are still no vendor contracts for the Cancun trip, and the personal visa transfers remain unaddressed." "So still materially incomplete," I said. "Yes," she said. I called Norma into the kitchen and told her. She listened, nodded once, and picked up her phone to call David. "Open the case," she said when he answered. There was a brief pause on David's end. Then, "I'll file tomorrow morning." Norma set the phone down and looked at me across the kitchen table. No triumph in her face. No satisfaction exactly. Just the quiet, settled look of someone who has been careful and thorough, and is now watching the process work exactly as it should. "We did everything right," she said. "We did," I said. Outside, the oak trees were still. The summer had begun to tip toward fall. Somewhere across the city, in a shop on Keller Avenue with a sign that said Bishop's Auto and Tire, a 30-day clock was about to start. David filed on a Tuesday morning. By Thursday, the legal demand letter had arrived at Bishop's Auto and Tire on Keller Avenue via certified mail. Signature required. Curtis signed for it himself. The delivery confirmation came through to David's office that afternoon, and he forwarded it to us within the hour. The letter was 4 pages. I'd reviewed every word before David sent it, and I'll admit I read it again when he forwarded the confirmation, just because there's a particular satisfaction in seeing a carefully constructed document delivered to the people who assumed it would never be used. The demand was plain: repayment of the outstanding principal, $150,000, plus accrued interest at 4% annually, which by that point came to $6,000. Total, $156,000, payable within 30 days. If unpaid, David would file suit seeking enforcement of the promissory note's collateral clause. Our 20% equity stake in Bishop's Auto and Tire LLC, plus court costs and attorney's fees, as permitted under Texas law. Luis Gomez's findings were attached as an exhibit, all $31,000 of them, itemized, documented, and certified. Stephanie called that same evening, not Curtis, Stephanie. The number lit up my screen at 7:15, and I answered on the second ring. The marble composure I'd heard in her voice at the grand opening was gone. Something jagged had replaced it. "This is harassment," she said. "You're harassing your own son over a business disagreement." "We're enforcing the signed promissory note," I said. "The letter explains each step of the process in detail." "You're trying to destroy what he built." The $31,000 in personal expenditures documented in Luis Gomez's report is what put the business at risk, I said. "We're offering a path to resolution. That's the opposite of destruction. I'll have a lawyer contact yours." "David Wallace's contact information is printed on the letterhead," I said. "Page 4, bottom right." She hung up, hard enough that I heard it as a click and a silence. I set the phone on the counter and wrote a note in my log. Call received 7:17 p.m. hostile tone. No substantive response to demand letter content. Threatened legal representation. Time-stamped and saved. 2 days after that, Curtis rang our doorbell at 4 in the afternoon. No text, no call. He just appeared on the porch, and when I opened the door, I saw a man who hadn't properly slept since the letter arrived. Thinner in the face, the easy, practiced confidence he carried everywhere, the one that had sold us on the business plan, that had made the whole thing seem so natural, was simply gone. He looked like himself at 22, before he learned to perform certainty. I stepped back. "Come in." Norma was in the kitchen. She came to the doorway, looked at him once with an expression I recognized, relief and grief in the same breath, and went to put the kettle on without a word. Curtis sat at the kitchen table, not the far corner where he used to spread his toy cars across the placemat as a kid. He sat in the middle, like a man who wasn't sure where he was allowed to be anymore. I took Louise's report from the counter and set it in front of him. He knew what it was. The demand letter had referenced it, but seeing the printed pages is different from reading a summary. He went through it page by page. His jaw tightened on the furniture receipts. He turned to the Cancun section and read slowly. When he reached the 2 direct transfers to Stephanie's personal visa, he put his hand flat on the table and stopped. "I didn't know about the visa transfers," he said. "I believe you," I said, and I did. "But I signed the joint business account with her." "You did? So I'm liable for everything that came out of it." "Jointly and severally, yes. That's how the account worked, and how the promissory note was signed." He was quiet. The kitchen clock moved. Outside, a car went slowly down Magnolia Drive. Norma set a cup of tea in front of him. He didn't ask for it, and he didn't thank her. He just wrapped both hands around it and stared at the table, like a man revising a version of his life he'd thought he understood. "What do you need from me?" he asked. "What the note says," I told him. "Repayment. All of it. Or we proceed with the equity claim and let the court determine the outcome." "I can't produce $156,000 in 30 days. "I know," I said. "That's why we need to talk about alternatives. But before that conversation can happen, you and Stephanie need to decide whether she's going to cooperate with this process or fight it. That decision shapes everything that comes next." He nodded slowly. When he left an hour later, his shoulders were slightly less rigid. Not resolved, just less broken. Norma stood at the front door and watched his truck back out of the driveway. Neither of them waved. "He's going to have to choose," she said. "I know." She looked down the empty street. "I hope he makes the right one." She went back to the kitchen. I stood at the door a moment longer, watching the space where his truck had been. 31 years of insurance work had taught me something that family life takes longer to learn. Sometimes the most important thing you can do for someone is hold a line, not to punish them, because the line is what gives them something solid to stand on once they decide to stop running. I closed the door. The 30-day clock was running. 8 days after the demand letter was delivered, David called at 9 in the morning with that particular tone I'd learned to recognize, measured, with quiet amusement underneath, like a man watching someone step onto ice he already knows will crack. "Their response came in this morning," he said, and Stephanie retained an attorney. Young firm, aggressive style. He goes by Marcus Webb. His letter argues that the promissory note was signed under duress, that family pressure constituted coercion, and therefore should be declared unenforceable. He also contends that the $150,000 was a parental gift, not a loan, and that repayment was never genuinely contemplated by either party at the time of signing. I sat down. He called a notarized promissory note a gift. "In writing," David said, 4 pages of it. Does he understand what notarized means? I assume so. He's arguing intent, not execution, claiming the document was a formality that didn't reflect the true nature of the transaction. It's not a strong position, but it's what's available to him. I thought for a moment. Intent arguments are fog. They're hard to prove and hard to disprove by document alone. What's our counter? The document is the primary counter. It's properly executed in every respect. But I want to know if there's anything else from the signing meeting that establishes the parties' understanding of what they were signing. I looked across the kitchen at Norma. She was already at the counter, phone in hand, scrolling through her voice memo app. Completely calm. She held the screen toward me. The recording. Date stamped to the same morning as the notary appointment. 47 minutes, 13 seconds. "David," I said, "we have a recording of the signing meeting." Norma kept it on her phone. "Texas is a one-party consent state." A pause. "Is Curtis audible? Does he acknowledge the loan?" Norma tapped the screen. Curtis's voice filled the kitchen, clear and unhurried. "It's a loan, obviously. We'll pay it back. This is how Dad wanted to do it, and that's fine." 3 seconds of silence on David's end. Then, "Send me that file today." Norma transferred the audio and emailed it to his office before noon. While she handled that, I made a call to Gene Pratt, a mechanic I knew who ran a shop 2 blocks from Curtis's place. At a neighborhood barbecue a few weeks back, Gene had mentioned almost in passing that the suppliers on Keller Avenue had been talking. I'd filed that away. "How's Bishop's holding up?" I asked him. He paused. "Honestly, I've heard they're behind on at least 2 supplier accounts. Parts wholesaler sent a second notice last week. Nothing catastrophic yet, but the word's out." I thanked him and added a note to the file. The shop was already under financial pressure, which meant the 30-day window wasn't just a legal deadline. If Curtis couldn't pay suppliers, he couldn't pay us. And if he couldn't pay us, the equity clause stopped being a threat and became a remedy. Marcus Webb had built his entire argument on one assumption, that the signing meeting was undocumented, that the loan discussion had happened verbally, in the comfortable blur of family conversation where nothing is ever recorded. He was wrong. When David forwarded our audio file to Webb's office with a brief cover note explaining one-party consent under Texas law, the reply took 2 full days to arrive. When it did, it was 1 paragraph. Webb requested a 2-week extension to reassess his client's position. David called and read it to me. I was in the garage, sanding a chair rung. "An extension," I said. 2 weeks. "What do you recommend?" "Grant it," he said. "It signals confidence. More importantly, it gives their client time to understand that his attorney's primary argument has collapsed, and that the remaining path forward is negotiation, not litigation." I set down the sandpaper. "Grant it." I looked at the chair on the workbench. The rung was smooth now, fitted back into the frame, held with fresh glue and a clamp. In a day it would be invisible. You'd never know it had been loose. Norma appeared in the garage doorway. "Well?" "Their argument fell apart," I said. "They need more time." She came in and sat on the stool by the workbench, was quiet for a moment. "And Curtis? Has he called?" "Not yet. He will," she said, "when he finally understands what her strategy is actually costing him." She was right. She's almost always right about people, and never more right than when she's talking about Curtis. The court had received our filing and set a preliminary hearing 6 weeks out, standard Tarrant County timeline. With Webb's extension, the negotiation window was narrowing toward that date. If no settlement was reached, both sides would appear before a judge. On our table, a notarized promissory note, Luis Gomez's certified findings, and 47 minutes of audio. On their table, an abandoned gift theory and a request for more time. I didn't feel triumphant about that. I felt tired clarity, the kind you get when a process you started months ago is finally running at the speed it was designed to run. 2 days before the extension expired, Curtis called. His voice was different from every previous call, quieter, stripped of the performance, like a man who had stopped rehearsing. "She filed for divorce," he said. "I'm sorry," I said, and I meant it. A moment of silence. Then, "She's trying to transfer her interest in the LLC to a holding company she set up, something she registered 2 weeks ago. She's moving it out of our joint estate before the divorce can touch it." I was still for a second. "Does David know?" "Not yet." "Call him tonight, Curtis. Not tomorrow. Tonight, before the transfer goes through." Quiet on the line. "Okay," he said. "I mean it." "I know you do," he said. And something in the way he said it, tired, without argument, told me that he'd finally stopped looking at us through Stephanie's eyes. He called David that evening. I know because David texted me at 9:15. Curtis Bishop retained me as additional counsel for disclosure matters. We moved tomorrow morning. David moved quickly. By the next morning, he had filed an emergency motion to freeze any transfer of Stephanie's LLC interest, pending the outcome of the debt enforcement case. Tarrant County courts take asset dissipation seriously when it's documented, and David documented it thoroughly. Stephanie's new holding company had been registered just 12 days before she filed for divorce. The timing was not subtle. The freeze was granted within 48 hours. I found out from David by phone while I was in the garage, fitting a new arm to the wingback chair. The piece had been carved to match the original. Not by me, I'm not that patient, but by a craftsman downtown who did restoration work. I'd picked it up that morning. It slid into the mortise with the right amount of resistance. The court granted the freeze, I said. Granted, David confirmed. Her interest in the LLC cannot be transferred, sold, assigned, or encumbered until the debt case is resolved. If she tries to complete the transfer anyway, she'll be in contempt. I set down the mallet. How did she respond? Webb hasn't filed anything yet, but Curtis told me she's aware of it. I thought about that. The holding company had been her exit plan. Keep the equity, shed the debt, walk away with the asset while leaving Curtis to handle the lawsuit alone. The freeze meant that plan was finished. 1 week before the court hearing, Curtis came back to the house. This time, Norma and I were both in the kitchen when he arrived. She'd been helping me sort through the restored chair's fabric swatches, an argument we'd been having pleasantly for 2 weeks about whether the original teal or a deeper navy would read better with the wood tone. We both looked up when the bell rang. He looked worse than the last time. He'd lost more weight, the hollows under his eyes were deeper, and he walked into the kitchen with the particular carefulness of someone who no longer trusts the floor. He sat down. I put on coffee. Norma closed the fabric book. She filed last week, he said. She's already moved her personal accounts. The apartment, her name was never on the deed, so that's staying. But she says she wants half its value settled in the divorce. That's between you and the divorce attorneys, I said. He nodded. I know. He turned the coffee cup in his hands. I'm not here about that. He looked up at me and then at Norma. I'm here because I need to know what comes next if I walk into that courtroom. David walks you through what the note requires, I said. Nothing more, nothing less. And if I can't pay the full amount in the time frame? Norma spoke before I could. That's why we're talking now, she said. Her voice was steady. Because there may be an alternative to the courtroom. If you're willing to commit to a payment structure and sign a new agreement, we can request the hearing be converted to a settlement review. He looked at her. What kind of structure? Full principal repayment over 36 months, she said. No additional interest. First payment due 60 days from signing. David prepares the repayment agreement. You sign. We withdraw the civil action. Curtis was quiet for a long moment. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere down Magnolia Drive, a dog was barking at something routine. And Stephanie? He asked. She's on the original note. She'll be required to sign as co-obliger, I said. If she refuses, the civil action proceeds against both of you as joint debtors. The court will sort out her portion. You can't be released from the agreement unilaterally. She won't sign, he said. That's her choice to make, Norma said quietly. He rubbed his face, the same gesture he'd made at the table the first time he came, a man searching for something solid under his hands. If she doesn't sign and you go to court, what happens to the shop? David argues for the equity stake, I said. 20% plus outstanding balance plus fees. If the court awards it, we become partial owners of Bishop's Auto and Tire. He was very still. I don't want that, Curtis, I said. I want you to have your shop. I want you to run it well and pay us back over 3 years and eventually not need us involved at all. That's what I want. I paused. But what I want depends on whether you can commit to the agreement. Another silence, longer. Then he looked at Norma, not at me, at her. There was something in his face I hadn't seen in 3 years. Not the salesman's smile, not the defensive posture of someone caught. Just a son, looking at his mother, uncertain and sorry. She looked back at him. Can you give us a day? He asked. Take the day, she said. He left before dark. When his truck was gone, Norma sat back down at the kitchen table and let out a long, slow breath. He'll sign, she said. I sat across from her. And if Stephanie doesn't? She looked at me steadily. Then David goes to court with everything we have, and the court decides her portion. She folded her hands. Either way, we're protected. Either way, the debt gets addressed. She paused. I just hope she's smart enough to understand that fighting this is more expensive than settling it. I picked up the fabric swatch book and set it between us. Navy, I said. She looked down at it, surprised. Then she smiled. The real one. Finally, she said. I'd been right about that for 2 weeks. Curtis called the next evening. He was signing. David prepared the repayment agreement that night. $150,000 over 36 months. Equal quarterly installments. No interest. First payment due 60 days from execution. Standard language. Airtight structure. Curtis reviewed it with his own attorney, a different one from Stephanie's firm, someone he'd found himself, and came back with 2 minor clarifying questions, both of which David answered within an hour. The following morning, Curtis signed. Stephanie did not. Her attorney, Marcus Webb, the young, aggressive one with the collapsed gift theory, submitted a formal response stating that Stephanie Torres Bishop declined to participate in any settlement agreement while divorce proceedings were pending, and that she disputed her co-obliger status on the grounds that the divorce constituted a material change in the parties' relationship to the debt. David read me the response over the phone. I was at the kitchen table with my coffee. "Can she do that?" I asked. "She can try," David said. "Her argument has no legal merit in Texas. The divorce doesn't extinguish joint debt obligations signed before the proceedings. The court has already frozen her LLC interest. When we go before the judge, we'll present the note, the audio, Louise's findings, and the fact that she attempted to transfer her LLC interest to a holding company 12 days before filing for divorce." He paused. "The judge will not be sympathetic." He was right. The preliminary hearing was 4 days later. Norma and I drove to the Tower Building together, took the elevator to David's floor, and walked with him the 2 blocks to the Tarrant County Courthouse. It was a Tuesday, cooler than the weeks before, that first edge of fall in the air that Fort Worth gets in October, when you're not expecting it. The hearing lasted just over an hour. Stephanie appeared with Webb. Curtis appeared separately with his new attorney. Norma and I sat on our side of the gallery and watched the process work. The judge reviewed the promissory note, reviewed Louise's certified findings, and reviewed the motion David had filed regarding the attempted LLC transfer. He listened to Webb's argument regarding disputed co-obliger status. Then he listened to David's counter, which included playing 41 seconds of the audio. Curtis's voice, clear and matter-of-fact. "It's a loan, obviously. We'll pay it back." Webb had no response to that. You can't argue intent against a recording. The judge ruled that Stephanie remained a joint debtor under the promissory note. He ordered her personal accounts to remain frozen pending resolution of her portion of the outstanding balance, $31,000, corresponding to Louise's documented findings of personal expenditures. He noted for the record that the timing of the LLC transfer attempt in relation to the divorce filing suggested deliberate asset dissipation, and that the court took a dim view of it. Stephanie's face, when the account freeze was confirmed, was the only moment in the whole proceeding that I could describe as satisfying in a clean way. Not triumph, I want to be precise about that. It was the specific, quiet satisfaction of watching the structure hold exactly the weight it was designed to hold. She'd spent 3 years looking at Norma and me as instruments, useful until they weren't, then dismissible. The account's freezing was the moment she understood she'd been looking at the wrong thing the whole time. She didn't look at us when she left. Webb had his hand on her elbow and was already talking. Her face was white and set. The composure returned, but different now. Brittle, not marble. Curtis paused in the corridor on the way out. He looked at me. "I'll make the first payment in 60 days, he said. "I won't miss one." "I know," I said. He nodded. Left. David shook our hands on the courthouse steps. He said the remaining proceedings on Stephanie's portion would likely take another month, but the outcome was as solid as he'd seen. He'd call when things moved. Norma and I drove home. In the driveway, she didn't get out of the car right away. She sat looking at the house, the old oak trees, the porch, the garage door I'd left half open before we left. "It's over," she said. "The legal part," I said. "Yes," she paused. "The rest takes longer." She was talking about Curtis, about the rebuilding that would be slow and uneven and real, not the kind of resolution that happens in a courtroom, but the kind that happens over 3 years of quarterly payments and occasional phone calls, and the gradual reestablishment of trust that doesn't look like anything dramatic from the outside. I went to the garage. The wingback chair was finished. Navy fabric on the seat and back. The new arm fitted and stained to match the original, the repaired leg invisible under the polish. I'd been working on it since spring. I set it in the light from the garage door and looked at it the way you look at something when you're deciding if it's done. It was done. Norma appeared with 2 cups of coffee. She set one on the workbench, looked at the chair, and sat in it. She settled back against the fabric and looked at me with her arms resting on the new arm and the original arm, both the same color now. "Navy," she said. "Navy," I agreed. She smiled. I picked up my coffee. 31 years, I said. I assessed damage for other people, calculated losses, filed reports, told strangers how much something was worth and what it would take to make it whole. She waited. "This time it was ours," I said. "And the difference is, this time I actually care how the repair holds." She looked at me across the garage, across 39 years of mornings and disagreements, and the particular comfort of knowing someone completely, and she said, "It'll hold." I believed her. If you enjoyed this story, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments below. For the next story, click on the box to the left. Thank you for watching.